Okay, we get quite a number of participants now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lee Chua, one of the lecturers at Ta UC. Welcome to this webinar. Young Esmonde Yap is a young architect, up and coming architects in Malaysia, and he's the son of one of my good friends at University of New South Wales. And it is really an honor to be able to invite Esmonde to give us a talk this evening. We have tried to arrange it many times, but every time, last minutely, Esmonde got some more important or more urgent thing to attend to. That's why we couldn't make it. And I'm glad that finally we can do it tonight. Thank you so much, Esmonde. And thank you to the rest of you who have tuned in tonight. I'm sure this is going to be quite an interesting, inspiring session. We have one of our students, Victoria, to introduce Esmonde to you all. So I will pass the floor to Victoria now. Victoria, please take over.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, good evening, everyone. My name is Victoria from RAR1, and I will be giving a brief introduction for today's event. So, AR Esmonde Yap is a registered architect and interior designer with the Board of Architects Malaysia, LAM, and a corporate member of the Malaysian Institute of Architects, PAM, since 2018. He graduated from the University of New South Wales in Sydney with a Bachelor of Architectural Studies in 2012 and a Master of Architecture in 2014. At UNSW, he was granted the chance to study under a Pritzker Prize Winner, Glenn Murcutt, and his associate, Wendy Lewin. So today, Esmonde will be sharing his lessons from Murcutt in creating architecture that responds to the landscape and climate by implementing natural elements to understand how a building works based on its environment. So without further ado, I would like to welcome AR Esmonde Yap.
Hi everyone, can you hear me and can you see me? Perfect. All right, perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Victoria, and thank you, Cho Hua, from Ta College, invited me to give a talk on lessons from Murcutt. I think it has been like 5 years since he wanted to invite me to give a talk, but unfortunately some things got in the way. But nevertheless, we are here today, and thank you for your time for joining me. So this is a design lecture. Hopefully I'll impart some knowledge to help you guys improve your techniques and design thinking wise. All right, so I think Victoria has introduced me. So a bit of background. So I graduated from New South Wales 2012 and 2014 with a Bachelor and a Masters of Architecture. So I obtained my Part 3 to be a registered architect in 2018. All right, since then I've been working in a corporate firm in Malaysia, one of the biggest, and have left there. So under Glenn Murcutt and Wendy Lewin, which is his associate and his wife. So I studied with them or under their tutelage in third year, which is my bachelor graduation program, which I will share with you guys. So I will share with you guys my graduation program along with some other important notes to take. So this project, A Recovery of the Fallen Horizon, is actually one of the top 10 winners for PAM Tan Sri Chan Sao Lai back in 2013, and was voted top 40 in international competition next landmark. All right, so hopefully I will impart some knowledge that Mr. Murcutt has taught me in terms of his architecture. So for social media wise, you can follow me on Instagram, Clubhouse, or you can drop me an email if you want to ask me any questions regarding today's talk or anything related to architecture. All right, so today's talk is Glenn Murcutt. So this is the architect's profile. Some of you might not have heard of him because he is not as well known as the star architects such as Rem Koolhaas or Zaha Hadid or Norman Foster. Glenn is more like more towards like he does smaller scale in terms of residential projects. Nevertheless, he is one of Australia's most famous architects. Okay, so he graduated from UNSW as well. Back then, it was called Technical University of Sydney. So he was awarded the Pritzker Prize. I'm sure some of you know Pritzker Prize is equivalent to like a Nobel Prize in the social status or the achievement. And apart from that, he has also won gold medal with the American Institute of Architects and Australian Institute of Architects. So his architecture is not the type that shout out in terms of the fancy design, the curves and stuff like this. So Glenn's architecture is more towards very subtle, how it integrates with the landscape, the topography, taking into consideration the climate, the sun, the wind, and the surroundings. Okay. So this is me back then during university days. This is November 2011, back when I was second year. So this is my first encounter with Glenn. So we had a guest lecture, design lecture series, almost like something like this, but it was a physical. So as you can imagine, the room was packed to the brink. Okay. So one of the important things that he taught us, or rather that the takeaway was, he recommended every architecture student or every architect should read the Thinking Handbook by Juliani Palasma. Juliani is one of his best friend as well, or good friend. So in this book, it talks about the thinking hand. So it highlights the importance of touch in architecture, as well as the professions of craft. So the profession of craft, such as you can think of sculpture, artists, and others. So this book is divided into 8 parts. So it talks about the origin of touch, progressing to mastery of sense and understanding its contribution to the experience. So this book is very interesting because up to today, I've read like 2 or 3 times, can be more actually. So I highly recommend all of you to give it a try and read it. So I summarized or rather extracted a few key items here. Namely, is the working hand, the drawing hand, and the embroidered thinking. So you can see as architects, we always use our hand, whether to draw, to make models, or to fold, So this idea of drawing is, Glenn likes to say, it draws from the spirit. So it's from the mind directly to the hand and to the paper. So everything from your imagination of how the space would look like or how the space would feel like, is a direct translation to the hand. So that's why during the course, he insists that we use our hand rather than digital software like AutoCAD and Google SketchUp. So most of the time we were using hand to either to draw, to make models, just to get our sensibility towards the project. So in the book, it says that hands important is brought to attention as required skill is a prime contribution to processing of ideas. So it's the process of drawing your idea from the mind to the piece of paper. So architecture is also described as the art of constructing. You can see like on the right hand side, the pen, the ink smudge. So you can see like there's a process to creating a building. I'm sure some of you back in university or during your studies, you do the tracing paper over the tracing paper. So your hands will also feel like this in terms of their lead or smudge. All right. So today, I'll also talk about the building I visited in Australia. So this is a Riversdale Boyd Education Centre. So you can see in this context, it is situated right in the forest and river setting. On the right-hand side, you can see it's an old cottage farm. I'll go into that later. So the site is situated at Riversdale, which is approximately 2 or 3 hours from Sydney. Okay, it's quite a far journey, so we took like 3 hours just to get to the site. So the design brief for this is an open art teaching center to accommodate resident artists and the 32 young students, both from Australia and around the world. This is because this building is owned by Arthur Boyd. Arthur and Yvonne Boyd is also a patron for art. So therefore, they opened this art teaching center to accommodate the resident artists and the students. So just to give you some idea of what the architectural review described this building. So this building is designed to make a minimal impact on the local ecosystem. So if you have read Glenn Murcutt before, his motto or his architecture principle is touch the earth lightly. All right. So we will see how he how he uses the building and integrates it into the landscape. Okay. So it also mentioned that it has an intuitive feel for the place and nature. Okay. All right. So just a bit of the process, like I was talking about. So I managed to extract some images, whether it's from the book or from the website. So you can see the thought process here, how one approaches the building. So it's from a larger picture all the way down to a smaller picture, which is on the right-hand side. So you can see how the joinery detailing starts to happen. So all this is the finer things in architecture. So you consider the detailing, the jointing, you know, how the material comes together, the glass, the steel, the concrete, how it meets together. So if you can see towards my right hand side, the most right hand bottom corner, you can see he has the steel material, how it comes together, the corrugated roof, and the concrete comes jointing with it. Okay, so he not only the big spatial organization in terms of where the public space go, where the private space go. So sometimes as architects, we need to think about from the big scale all the way to the minor scale, which makes or breaks a building. So I'll talk a bit on the plan as to how it integrates with the landscape. So I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. Okay. So if you can see the cursor, my cursor, this is the existing cottage house on the right hand side just now. If I scroll back here, this white color house. Okay, so it's a English cottage house, weatherboard kind of house. So it's a very heritage kind of house outlook language. So what Glenn and Wendy, which is also my tutor, so what they did here was they arranged the public space to be here, and slightly more private space, which is the artist's residence here. So this acts as a public gathering where the public can gather here and have a meal here, draw everything out. Then they'll go and rest during the night time. Okay, so it's interesting to note. Okay, maybe in this section you can see the existing cottage house is a pitch roof. Okay, so how they design this grand entrance or grand hall is to invert the pitch roof. Okay, it's sort of like relating to the architecture, existing architecture. So from this section, it's also interesting to note that what Glenn did here was he's actually always inspired by Mies van der Rohe. So you can see clearly the language of Mies van der Rohe is here in terms of the bay windows. Okay, each bay windows here is approximately 6 meters, whereas the student accommodation is 3 meters apart. So you can see this is, maybe later you'll see on the image, this is slightly what we call a more solid enclosed space as compared to this open space, which is full of glass and some timber doors. Okay, so you can see how it integrates in terms of the horizontality of the building in relation to the landscape. This is also because in his architecture, he always celebrates the Australian horizontal landscape. Okay. All right, so this is how it looks like from when you approach the building, which is the main hall here. As you can see, the main hall is slightly more transparent and opens out to the river here. There's a river, Shorehaven River here, and the forest is right back here. Interesting to think about it that he also arranged his space based on the Louis Kahn's principle of serf and servant space. So if I were to go back a few slides, you can see that at the back here, which is the back of house, he has tucked all the servant space there, such as the storeroom, the kitchen, etc., etc. So the serve space, such as the hall and the living space, are arranged in front, and the corridor, which is the servant space, at the back. Okay, if you can see clearly here. So some of the pictures, you can see the inverted pitch roof, as mentioned just now. So this is the internal hall space. All right, you can clearly see the bay windows language here. Some lights to shine the ceiling. So interesting to note that this space is flexible. So in his buildings, he mentioned that he designed his buildings as a sailboat. So sailboat, what it means by sailboat is like you can fine tune your building according to the climate of the situation, the climate, the topography. So you can see clearly that when you want to enclose the main hall, this sliding door can be slide all across the hall. And when you want to open for view and to frame the view, then you can slide it all the way back so that they can enjoy the view, be one with nature. So you can see the interplay of inside outside starts to happen here. Okay. The reason he also slant the roof is to get more view towards the surrounding landscape. So this is a quote, another quote by Architecture Review. It says that by skillful framing of views, the building provides an instrument for reading the landscape. So it frames the landscape, so thereby you can read the landscape from within. All right, so moving on to this slightly more enclosed space as compared to the more transparent space. This is the student accommodation, which is slightly towards the south side. You can clearly see the fins of the accommodation here. Two reasons for this. The first reason is due to privacy. Okay. The second reason is due to natural sunlight. So it blocks the east sunlight coming in, so it diffuses the light when it comes through. So later, in my next slide, you'll see the joinery detail. So this will emphasize more on why I mentioned his building is almost like a sailboat tuned according to the surroundings. Okay, so inside, this is the accommodation area. So you can see the window. You can tune it according to a person's comfort. So you can either close it or open. So you can see here in my mouse, some of it, if you don't want too much light, you can close the top part. But if you want ventilation, you can slide it open. It's like a hopper window, so the air or breeze can just come in. Or if you rather have it all open, ideally you can open it all the way. Okay. So flexibility of space, it can fit 4 people at once, or if you want to be more private, it can fit 2 people. All right. Here comes my bachelor graduation project, which is 3rd year. So I submitted this project against the 5th year and managed to get into the top 10. So quite lucky on that. So the design brief, please note that this project was guided by Glenn and spearheaded by him. So this design brief was a simple educational facility center to accommodate 32 occupants. It's almost similar to what he had done in Riversdale. Okay, so our site for this project was in Bunu Bunu National Park. I know it sounds funny, but it is what it is. And it is quite close to Ball Rock National Park, which you can see on the bottom left hand here. So Bunu Bunu is approximately 5 to 6 hours from central Sydney. So it took quite a while for us to get to the location. So it's considered outback area where there are no electricity, no water supply, and no basic sewage system. So you kind of frame your mind what is the setting now. All right, just to give you guys a scale of how big the rock is, because this rock is considered quite important. So you can see the human figure there. Some of them most of them are my batch mates. So you can see the rock is as big as a human, or some even bigger. So you can see some eucalyptus trees around the surrounding. So we had to climb up from the bottom here, if you can see my mouse, from the bottom here all the way to the top, it took us quite a while to climb up because it's quite steep, steeper than grade 4 slope. So you can see the surrounding, or it's more like an outback landscape, Australian landscape, which celebrates the horizontality. Just to give you a sense of scale again, you see the human here as compared to the rock. So this is the Ball Rock National Park. So our site is next to it, which is here, Bunu Bunu National Park. So our site has there's only one access, Bunu Bunu Falls Road. So you can imagine that we need to think about the circulation towards our site, how to approach our site. Not sure if you can see towards the left-hand side the words. So before we went to site, we were assigned in a group of 4 or 5, 6 groups. So each group has to study like a different aspect of the site, such as the history, the climate, geology, flora and fauna, and photography, and the survey of the site. So I would not go into it too much because I think it is quite time consuming. So I'll just briefly touch on it, and hopefully you guys get a brief or sense idea how much depth of research goes into the place before we start designing. So we started off with the history of the site. So as you know, Australia before the colonial took over it was occupied by indigenous people, also known as Aboriginal people. So you can see the architecture is very simple, which is almost like a hut kind of setting. So that's the basic habitation or building of Aborigine people. So as time goes by, the European settlement starts to come in. So the British starts to colonize the land, and hence you can see some of the old colonial buildings starts to appear. Some of Tenterfield, Saddle, the post office and stuff like that. So you can see the English cottage kind of history starts to appear there. So also we touch a bit on climate. So why is climate important to the site? Because you get to think about 2 things in terms of the climate aspect. One is the solar exposure and wind patterns. Solar exposure is important in Australia because it is a winter country as compared to Malaysia. So it's a tropical country. So we had to think about the solar exposure, how many hours per day that we can receive the sun, because as mentioned just now, the site is situated at the outback area where there's no access to energy, no access to clean water, etc., etc. Okay, so the solar exposure in Sydney, as compared to Sydney, we are able to generate a 17 to 18 megajoules per square meter. For the wind patterns, how we look at the wind pattern is because the winter and summer. So we study how the northeast wind pass through our site and consequently pass through our building. So we try to capitalize on how this natural element starts to interplay. All right, the next one we studied was the geology of the site, as mentioned just now. The Ball Rock, because this was a historical rock whereby 3 tribes. What I mean by tribes is the Aborigine tribes. It's a neutral meeting space for them, and some of it is like a spiritual importance to them, where they pray to the god on the stone there. So we took a deeper research into this history. Also, we look at the flora and fauna to the site. This one is because we had to think about what are the existing species on site, what are the trees on site, the tree profiles, how high the tree is, and how high the tree can shade our building, so we can interplay with the sunlight and shading. It's also interesting to note that Glenn mentioned that sometimes the flora and fauna gives you a sense of smell and the movement of animals. You can see where the ant moves around, where the animals like to hide. So it sort of gives you the natural flow of the site. Okay. So some of the photographies that we took there. So you can see this photography was like trying to emphasize the movement of the water in relation to the site. So just for context wise, If you can see my cursor again. So this is the bus park here where we access. So this is the road. So you can see like there's a very steep fall to the river here. Okay. So it's quite a powerful landscape, but quite barren. Okay, so this is another picture that a group has taken. So it studies the landscape in terms of the building and the topography, how it starts from the urban setting all the way to our site. So you can see from the urban setting, all the tall trees or very narrow street and roads slowly starts to disappear and forms into a horizontal landscape and a shorter 1 or 2 story buildings. So you can see towards the end there, it's just the nature topography or the trees left. So this is like documenting our journey to the site. All right, so this is my team, or rather, I was in this team, which we did survey of the site. So what we did here was we measured how the trees height, the radius of the trees, and how deep is the site, what's the fall. So it's approximately 15 to 20 meter from the road till the river. So just to put in context, this is the access road here, and the river is here. So we had to measure all around here, the trees diameter and stuff. All right, so you can see photography taken. This is the west and the east elevation. So in terms of the west elevation, you can see that there are more trees as compared to the east elevation, where there are more rocks. So you start to think where to insert your building and where to place your building in relation to the overall landscape. So it is very important that I mentioned just now that the sketches or drawing is very important. So what we did there was we spent the whole day just sitting on site. You can see some of my colleagues here sitting on site, sketching the pattern of the landscape, the trees, just to get a better idea and feel of the site. So on the right hand side is my simple sketch. It shows the transition of the section through the site. So as you transit from one point to another, from the east to the west, the topography or the rock profile changes from a more narrow to a slightly enclosed and starts to space out again. All right, some of the details that we took there. So this is some of the pictures, the river flowing in relation to the rock and stuff. Okay, so this is me, fresh face guy, 3rd year. I think some of you are in this phase now. So carrying a sketchbook and sketching on site. You can see some of my colleagues here. Interesting to note that this guy here is he is actually a doctor. He has finished his medicine degree and he studied architecture degree as well and managed to finish 5 years. So the total amount he spent in university was 10 to 11 years. So architecture students shall not complain. Okay. So this is a picture that my friend just sent to me. So this is Glenn here in discussion with us. So how he works is he will go around each studio and start sketching and giving his knowledge and idea, sharing his knowledge and idea. So sometimes most of the time it's very inspiring. So what I did as a curious or hungry student was I followed him to each room and try to learn as much as possible. But it was a very good impact on me. So, okay, coming to the final part, which is the design proposition. Now that you have understand the precedent study that we went, the site and our site studies or documentation that we did. Okay, so the simple concept for this building is to connect the heaven and the earth, which is also known as the sky and the earth, because the building will mediate between the heaven and earth. So the tree serves as a point between the connection. So a bit of site sketch and site profile. So you can see the site is here, and thinking in terms of the sun rise and setting sun. So winter sunrise and winter sunset, summer sunset and summer sunrise. Where the north point, very important to put your north point in design, thinking about the sun that can come in. So thinking about the breeze of the wind and to the view of the site. So the design approach is to fragment the building. My design approach So why do I fragment a building? Is to form a tension or to blur the space between the interior and exterior. So in order also to create a portal view or frame the view when you are moving or transiting through the site. Okay, so it creates a different scale and complexity throughout the landscape. Okay, so also to fragmented also to create like a linear kind of form. So it's a progressive movement throughout the site. All right, in terms of the ecological system, we had to think about the water storage, the electricity generation, and the waste discharge or cleansing of the waste. So we had to calculate the capacity volume for the water to be stored. I think it's indicated in the blue color. Then we had to think about the waste ecosystem. So waste filtration, EcoMax system, how it filtrates the waste and turns it into a filtered water. And we had to calculate the number of photovoltaic cells in order to be self-sustaining building. So you can see all this idea is towards creating a more self-sustaining building, because as mentioned just now, the site is almost like a barren land where there are no electricity or basic necessities. All right, so I always believe, or Glenn also always believes in precedent studies. So what we look at before, some of the buildings that have been done. So I was looking at a very famous Pritzker Prize winner also, Paulo Mendes da Roca is a Brazilian architect. So he's famous for doing concrete building and notably raw concrete building, so off-form concrete. So also look at Glenn Murcutt, so how he arranged his spaces, the servant space. Also look a bit on Louis Kahn's, enclosure space and the servant space. So this is the design plan or the design proposal plan. So whereby, okay, if you can see my mouse, this is the main approach here. So we had to think about how the bus maneuver around the site. So we had to think about the size, the turning radius of the bus. So once you enter, you'll be here, greeted into the nature surrounding. This is the river here, the slightly gray color. And this is the main hall where people will dine and eat together, share the knowledge, experience together. And this is the outdoor area. So you can see the public space is tucked, is generally gathered in this building, whereas is flanked by two slightly more private space. So this is the accommodation area, and this is the caretakers area. So same like the Riverdale building that I show you, we also had to design for the caretaker. Okay, so a caretaker stays here almost like permanently, and this is like probably rented out and stuff like this. Okay, so what we try to do in this space is to create different kind of setting, a different kind of feeling, or in relation to the site. So some of it you can see is more like a study area, enclosed indoor area, as compared to the balcony at the site. So you can experience the site differently. Okay. Also take note, because I'm going to show you a section, that the site is quite gradual at this area, and it starts to slope a lot at this area and this area. So this is just a section taking through the three different buildings. So the caretaker building is slightly deeper because sometimes he doesn't really want to access the site. Whereas the main hall and accommodation is more gradual, nicely tucked into the site. So for this strategy, you just had to excavate a bit and just tuck your building in relation to the trees, the height of the trees and the surrounding. So you can see here, the person standing here has nice connection to the river. Similarly with the accommodation section. So this is the elevation that we did from the road. So you can see from the road, you can't really see anything except the we call the roof profiles where the skylight enter. It's interesting. Maybe I'll go back. So the roof profile here captures the morning sun. So morning sun sort of diffuse into the interior space. For the main accommodation area, because it is used throughout the day. So what we did here was just a diffuse kind of a membrane on top of the RC structure. Okay, so a clearer look on this. So the elevation from the river, which is the west elevation, you can see how the interplay between the earth, the sky, and the architectural horizon fit inside. So this is a model that we did using balsa wood. Cost a lot, but managed to finish it. So you can see like this was quite a big model. I think it's maybe A0, A1 size. So we had to build the context. So you can see clearly this is the river here, and how the building sits in relation to the topography. So the reason why we selected to place our building at higher level, because this is a flatter area as compared to this steep slope. So the perspective from the inside, so it's almost similar. There's a base structure inside the building, so you can have the connection within the inside and outside space. So more pictures on the model. So you can see some of the cute photovoltaic cells on top here, because the the sun moves from the east to the west. So we try to capture as much hourly sun as possible. So you can see here the bay window and the outdoor here. So some of you must be wondering why I left a hole here, because on site there's an existing tree on site, but I did not put it in here. Okay, I think that's about it from my side. I hope some of you had some good input. If there are any question and answer, hopefully I can answer them. Moderators, are there any questions?
Hi, thanks, Esmonde, for your very interesting sharing. It is actually very appropriate for our students. We have a group of students who is doing a small retreat for architects right now.
Oh wow!
I think your process is very good, very enlightening. I'm sure they have learned a lot of things from you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can encourage some of you, our students, to ask Esmonde some questions that you may have. After this, I will hand over to Victoria to handle the moderation of the questions. Victoria, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, so you take over from here, see whether you see any questions being posted on the chat or not.
Currently, there's one right now.
Okay.
Ming-Shin asked, may I know how did you generate the topography plan?
Yeah, we went to a state library, to get the topography. Then before going to site, which is the 6 hours bus ride, we went to a library and get some information on the topography. Then we went to site to survey further to ensure that everything is slightly more accurate.
Yeah, for our case here in Malaysia, in a real project, usually you will be given a contour plan, survey plan by the surveyor. But for our current project, I think most of the time you can actually get the contour from Google Map. If you have any further queries on that, we can get the senior to teach you how to get the contour from Google Map. I hope that answers your question.
Hello, good evening, Esmonde.
Hi.
Yeah, okay, it's Gunting here. So it's very interesting that on your presentation, I like it a lot. So my question here is, how do you find it was helpful for you to have pursued your study in Australia and came back to Malaysia to pursue your design in Malaysia? I mean, how do you find studying Australia is helpful for you to pursue your design in Malaysia, to be short?
Okay. Okay, when I first graduated, I straight away came back to Malaysia. So what I did was I joined a commercial firm architecture. So it literally is a 180 change, as in. So it's really, really different. So I had to get used to the practice in Malaysia and stuff like this. And I guess it's so much about using the same principle in terms of I remember Glenn always mentioned that we can't be doing extraordinary things. Okay, but you can do ordinary things extraordinary. So the key idea here is, in terms of every approach to a project, just give all your input or your heart. I think that should be fine. So in terms of the architecture aspect, so the climate is a bit different as compared to Australia. So we had to sort of like study what are the precedents that have been done here. So interesting to think of some of them. If I can think of mine, like Studio Mumbai, or I think Corbusier did some buildings in India. Louis Kahn did some buildings in India as well. So, oh yeah, I also been to Chandigarh just to study how Corbusier did in terms of the tropical setting. So it's interesting to see most of them are almost similar, which is using like the brise solis or the natural ventilation. So some of the principles can still be utilized here in Malaysia. The principles.
Okay, so you think it's actually worthwhile for us for some of us that had the intention to pursue their study in Sydney or maybe Australia. So is it okay?
Definitely, because you not only learn the architecture, you have to learn how to survive there, because you need to cook for yourself, do some laundries. But in terms of the architecture wise, I find that the schools in Australia teaches a lot of research and reading a lot of theories. So, but it also depends on which school that you attend or you study at. So, like for example, UNSW, because it was a more technical background school, so emphasize a lot on the technical background. I'm sure Mr. Lee Chou-hua knows here. As compared to RMIT, which is more those design based, such as like Rhino, etc., etc. So you have to pick your school that you're interested in going.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem, Kun.
Okay, there's also another question from Jeremiah. He asked, kind of curious, since your design is climatically responsive, did you stimulate the building in the climate trend analysis software?
For this project, no. But throughout university, we have learned a software, because I think Glenn is those old school architect. So we are also trained under him. So therefore, we are slightly more old school. So we think in terms of the pen, pencil, and the tracing paper, and in terms of the site feel. How do you feel in relation to the site and the topography? But some other projects I've used it, but not for this project. Okay, good. Are there any further questions?
Yoga Villain says, may I ask how the culture and history of the site was considered during your design process?
All right. You can see that the culture was Aborigine and European kind of culture. So in terms of culture and history, so we take into consideration that this place used to be a meeting place for the Aborigines. And in terms of the history, you can see the progressive nature, like from a hut to a cottage kind of house setting, whereas what we insert into the site is more modern kind of materials used there, whether glass, steel, concrete, and it is also while retaining some of the cultural significance, which is also the gathering space and stuff like this. Also interesting to note that some of the more private space, like the study area, can be like a mediation space. So so try to integrate this culture and historical background into the site. Good question. Any more questions, guys? Since I think A.R. Lee has mentioned you're doing a architecture retreat or architects retreat. So take the chance to or opportunity to ask the questions.
So having Esmonde, having experienced a boutique kind of architecture practice in Australia as practiced by Glenn Murcutt, and then you come back and work in a very commercial office.
Yep.
So what sort of architects are you going to be?
I can never predict the future, but what I can say is all this knowledge that has been imparted is part of me, ingrained into me. So it's also it's interesting to see because what we learn in university are like the philosophy thinking or the conceptual thinking towards our architecture output, whereas the why we work or the practical training is more towards how we put stuff together, put the materials together, what are the key things to notice in terms of the construction, the practice wise.
But what type of architects do you want to be? Do you prefer to be? If you have the wish, like, if there's no other, if you have the chance, what sort of architect would you like to be?
Well, my dream is to build like a single house or a bungalow. Just focus on the basic necessities.
So you won't take over your dad's practice, lah. You start your own, is it?
Never know. We'll see how it goes in the future. Never know. So I'm just trying my best to, use what I've learned throughout the years of working and studying.
Okay, thank you. Victoria, over to you. I think there are some questions being posted. Victoria?
Yeah, there's one right now. Mingxin asked again. He said, what are the advantages of sketching by hand compared to digital?
Okay, this is, many people has also asked Glenn Murcutt this question, or I would just, because this was like 10 years ago, so I'll just recall some of the things that he mentioned regarding the digital and the hand. So the hand connects directly from your mind to the pencil to the paper. It's just one motion. Okay, whereas the digital aspect is more like your mind connects to the pen and connects to the digital screen. So you have sort of like a, like a filter that blocks you. So interesting to see because some students during the crit session when he walk around, some students show him on AutoCAD, okay, whereas I show him on Sketch. Okay, not to say I'm good or whatever, but those who show him AutoCAD, he'll just sort of like tell them off. Do you know what's the scale? Or because in AutoCAD you just zoom in, zoom out, you have different scale to the project. Whereas if you use like a tracing paper or Sketch, you have the scale in relation to the proportion, etc. So it's important to sometimes just give it like the old-fashioned way of sketching.
If I may add to the student asking this question, is that architecture is very much about making. So we actually make architecture by hands, although you don't do it directly as an architect, but traditionally the master builder would be building from the hand. So in order for you to feel or understand materials, proportion and scale and detailing or putting things together, it is better that you can feel the material, you can feel the sizes, you can feel how things, whether it's cold, hot, rough, smooth, to put together. So the more we use our hands, the more sensitive our hands would be in terms of the process of making architecture. So sketching is one way of training our hands to be more sensitive to the sight, to what we see, and to translate. The reverse is also true, to help us to translate what is in our mind onto the paper so that you can see and your client can see. So it's a two-way thing. Like one way is to absorb, to touch and feel, so that you can actually absorb and understand the things that you touch and feel around you. And on the other hand, it's also a way for you to express what is in your mind externally on a piece of paper, or to make the model for your client to see or for others to see. That's another way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend everyone to read this book. So if you have not purchased it, I think, although I don't have any commission, Book Depository or Amazon, or just go get this book. It's a very good book. Okay, I think we have a question here, Megat Arif. Thank you for your interesting sharing session on your design. Can you share a bit more on his philosophy regarding materials and space, perhaps? Can you share a bit? Okay. Going back to this. So you can see, over the years, Glenn has changed his language. So depends on the site as well, because some site which is in the outback setting, what he uses more lightweight materials. So like the timber structures. If you look at the Aboriginal house, the red color in I think northern Australia, if you Google his works later on, so you can see some of it he used the timber structures to give a more open kind of feeling to the building, to also promote ventilation. Whereas some, like in this case, this Boyd Center, he wanted to frame the view of the surrounding. Therefore, he used a heavier material such as the concrete to frame the surrounding landscape. I hope I answered your question, yeah? Megat? Okay. Okay, K2 BAM Case 01. Just want to say that some of the sketches are very inspiring. Yes. Some of his sketches are very inspiring. Let me just go back to some of the sketches. So actually, I spent a lot of time, some people might think I'm crazy. I spent a lot of time reading or tracing over his sketches. So sometimes I trace over, some of the C channel, how you terminate, how what the Batons or the Mullions, how you terminate to the RC. Or okay, in this example, in this instance, you can see how the corrugated extend like maybe 100 or 200 out from the steel eye section here. So I spend a lot of time tracing over all this. Some might think I'm a madman. Okay, Gary, hi. Might be something out of topic. Was wondering what are your expectations to residential design in Malaysia in future decades, though? My opinion on the future of residential, I think these days there are more and more high-rise residential, but there are still terrace and bungalows to be done. So because these days the cost of material is getting higher and higher, but nevertheless, as architects, we should ensure that good design should be affordable to all. Yeah. So I have expectations. I've sometimes it's just better to go with the flow rather than have expectations. Just do your best when a project comes in. Then you once you've done your best, I think you satisfy yourself and stuff like this. So hopefully I answer your question, Gary.
I think I have a question myself. Other than The Thinking Hand, what other books do you recommend?
I'm not sure if you heard about The Pattern Language. The Pattern Language is a very thick book. So that one you get to read a lot of the basic, like the streets, the buildings and stuff like this. Some of it I've also read. Depends whether you want theory or because some of it are like the Toto book. The Toto book is a lot of drawings. So some of it I just buy the drawings and just sketch over it. So theory-wise, there are a lot of theory books that you can get. I'm sure Mr. Lee Chowa here knows many more theory books than me. So you may ask him. He knows more than me. Yeah, but I also actually I love Corbusier's although it's towards a modern architecture. Louis Kahn's Light and Space. I'm more towards those old school kind of architects. So so I read all these modernist architect, the Mies van der Rohe, the Corbusier.
How come you're so young and you're attracted to the older architects? Huh?
Maybe I have old soul.
Is that your taste? Is that your taste?
I think that's a personal preference lah, like, you know, towards the older generation, because I think yes, the Zaha Hadid's buildings are very interesting and very modern, but it's just, you know, some people prefer this and some people prefer a more practical approach towards the architecture. So I see that, you know, the modern masters such as Mies, Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, all of them, you know, done some practical architecture. Okay, did I miss anything? Last question, Ming Sheng. How do you transition from Australia climate design to Malaysia? I think I mentioned just now, so it's more towards the principle of it. Regardless, even if you give me a Malaysian site, I'll just start with studying where's the north point, where is the rising sun, where's the setting sun, where's the wind direction, are there any trees or plantations around. So or what's the RL, which is the road level or the topography level. Sometimes when you read the survey plan can teach you what to do or how to design the platform level. So it's very important to understand your site. Okay, next one is Zixiang Gan. Just want to know, how do you find your architectural concepts? Wow, this one is a tough question. So I think concepts, you might need to read a few theoretical books. I think this concept was I picked up from, if you heard of Swerfen, he's also a Pritzker Prize Winner architect. So although he has only completed like 5 buildings in his whole life, but those 5 buildings are very impactful. So just keep reading it to get a good concept or architecture framework. Jeremiah, from your presentation, OC architecture is responsive to surrounding landscape in terms of scale and height, as well as availability of local materials. These are what we can emulate in a design in terms of using. Okay, I think it's a statement. Yep, thanks, Jeremy. Okay, Nicholas, how you define old architecture more practical than contemporary architecture? Okay, in terms of practicality, just taking, I think the word form over function or function over form comes to mind here, because if you look at the recent projects by, maybe, not to say there's no right or wrong here, this is just a discussion. So maybe like the building I've been to, one building is a Zaha Hadid building in Hong Kong. It's a Jockey Club Innovative Center. So this building is, as you know, Zaha's architecture is very curvature or very, angular. So to me, I find that yes, it might be a monumental, very striking, you can see from outside, it's a Zaha Hadid building. But in terms of the internal space, some of it, they are like dead end corners and stuff like that. So it is down to a personal preference on what kind of architecture. So to me, when I see this kind of spaces, I can't live with it. So I just like to square thing off and make it simple. Glenn also mentioned that simplicity is the hardest thing. In order to distill the architecture to the simplest form, it's one of the hardest art that he is still acquiring through the years. Okay. I hope I answered your question, Nicholas. So, Hao Yang Eng, hi, may I know how and where you get inspired when designing a building? I think I mentioned just now. So sometimes it always starts from the site, the level, the topography, the sun, the north point, the wind direction. So from this is the basic starting point. Then you start to think about the spatial composition, where you're going to put your more public, more private spaces, the servant spaces. So you try to arrange according to, sometimes you arrange according to the view and stuff like that. So yes, it is a long process. So as everyone knows, sorry, you need to eat, live, and breathe architecture. That's the term for it. Wow, good questions, man. Are there any more?
If there's no more, I think we shall call it a night because it's
Yep.
getting quite late.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Esmonde, for being our guest tonight. It has been very inspiring. I'm sure not only to the students, but to some of us older architects who've been practicing commercial architecture for too long. We've forgotten the art of architecture. So maybe some of us have a few things to learn from young people like you as well.
Yeah, sorry, I'd just like to add, in university especially, I think we make like 3 or 4 models every week. So you have slice off your hand most of the time. So, sometimes the art of making or drawing is very important to architecture. And I would like to thank Ta College University for inviting me to give this talk. I hope the students have learned some of the theories, architecture theories, and how to execute it in their design studio and stuff like this.
I'm sure they have. We will make sure that we invite you for the quiz when the students have done their design. Yeah, hopefully you can make it because you're so difficult to get.
He say I'm harder to invite than Mahathir.
Yes. I invited you to quiz so many times, but it never happened. Anyway, I think thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you've got something out of it. And we look forward to see you in our next webinar when we organize the next one. So thanks, Esmonde, again, and thank you, Victoria, for being the moderator. And thanks to Christy for organizing the logistic aspect of the talk.